Welcome to the Story Channel, where every story matters. Jake's story should touch your heart. It started on a lazy Sunday afternoon, one of those rare days when the house was quiet, and time seemed to stretch indefinitely. My wife, Rachel, had taken our son to a soccer game, leaving me alone with the odd luxury of having nothing to do. Wandering through the house, I stumbled upon a dusty box tucked away on the top shelf of the hall closet. Family photos, the label read in Rachel's neat handwriting. Curious, I pulled it down, carried it to the dining table, and opened the lid. Inside was a treasure trove of memories, stacks of photo albums, loose pictures, and even a few Polaroids from the early days of our marriage. Smiling to myself, I began leafing through them. The first album was from our honeymoon, a week spent on the beaches of Maui. Rachel looked radiant in every shot, her smile wide and carefree. I lingered on one photo of us sipping coconut drinks under a palm tree. I remembered that day vividly, the sunburn I got, the way Rachel teased me about it, and how we laughed until our sides hurt. Those were simpler times. As I flipped through more albums, the years unfolded in front of me, birthdays, holidays, random candid moments. Our lives were carefully documented, each image a testament to the love we shared and the family we built. But as I delved deeper into the pile, something began to gnaw at me. It started as a faint unease, barely noticeable at first. But the more I looked, the more apparent it became. In every group photo that included Erin, my best friend since college, Rachel seemed different. Her smile was brighter, her eyes sparkled more. There was a kind of effortless connection between them that felt almost too natural. I tried to dismiss it. Rachel and Erin had always gotten along well. He was practically family, after all. He had been my best man at our wedding and was our son's godfather. Rachel adored him, but I'd never questioned it. Why would I? He was my best friend, and she was my wife. They were two of the people I trusted most in the world. But now, flipping through years of photos, I couldn't unsee it. There was one picture, taken during a barbecue at our place a few summers ago, that struck me like a punch to the gut. In it, Rachel was laughing at something Erin had said, her head thrown back, her hand lightly resting on his arm. I was standing a few feet away, holding a plate of burgers, smiling faintly. But the focus of the photo, the undeniable energy of it, was between them. I closed the album and leaned back in my chair, my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Jealousy? Betrayal? Or was it just paranoia? Don't be ridiculous, I muttered to myself. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was already taking root. For the rest of the afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every little interaction between Rachel and Erin over the years replayed in my mind. The way she laughed at his jokes, the long conversations they sometimes had at parties, the way she always insisted he join us for family gatherings. Had I been blind to something right in front of me? Or was I overthinking it? When Rachel and our son came home, I tried to push the thoughts aside. She breezed into the kitchen, her face flushed from the cool autumn air. "Hey, babe," she said, kissing me on the cheek. "How was your day?" "Good," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just went through some old photos." "Oh, fun." She glanced at the box on the table. "Find any good ones?" "Yeah, lots of memories," I said. I wanted to ask her about the photos, about Erin, but I didn't know how to start without sounding insane. So, I stayed quiet. But that night, lying in bed beside her, my mind raced. I thought about Erin, his easy charm, the way people naturally gravitated toward him. He was the kind of guy who could walk into a room and make everyone feel like they'd been lifelong friends. And Rachel. Rachel had always been drawn to that kind of energy. I told myself it was nothing. Just my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't be able to let it go. Something about those photos had shifted something inside me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing a piece of the puzzle. As I drifted off to sleep, one thought lingered in my mind: what if I've been blind to something all along? The unease from the afternoon clung to me like a shadow, its weight growing heavier as the days passed. I couldn't stop replaying the moments I'd seen in those photographs, and every time I thought about Rachel and Aaron, the same question echoed in my mind: what if? I'd always prided myself on being a rational person, someone who didn't jump to conclusions. But now, rationality felt like a thin veil barely holding back a torrent of suspicion. And so, in the days that followed, I began to watch. Not openly, of course. That would have been ridiculous. But I found myself paying closer attention to Rachel's behavior, looking for anything that might confirm or dispel my fears. It started small. One evening, while Rachel was in the shower, her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A text from Aaron flashed across the screen: "Had a great time catching up. Let's do it again soon." My stomach twisted. When had they been catching up? Rachel hadn't mentioned meeting Aaron recently. Maybe it was something innocent, a quick coffee or lunch. But the phrasing of the text nagged at me. I didn't touch her phone, though the temptation burned in me. Instead, I shoved my hands in my pockets and walked away, trying to convince myself I was reading too much into it. That weekend, Aaron came over for dinner, as he often did. He brought his usual charm, a bottle of wine in one hand and a bouquet of flowers for Rachel in the other. "Just a little something for the best cook I know," he said with a grin, handing her the flowers. Rachel laughed and thanked him, placing the bouquet in a vase while I opened the wine. For most of the evening, things felt normal. We ate, we drank, and we reminisced about old times. Aaron told a story about our college days that had Rachel in stitches, and for a moment, I almost forgot my suspicions. But then, as I was clearing the table, I caught a moment between them. Rachel had leaned in close to Aaron, her hand resting briefly on his forearm as she whispered something to him. He laughed softly, his gaze lingering on her for just a second too long. It was subtle, so subtle that I might not have noticed if I hadn't been watching so closely. I clenched my jaw and turned back to the sink, my hands shaking as I rinsed the dishes. It was nothing, I told myself. Just a friendly gesture, a moment of shared humor. But the doubt was growing roots, spreading through my mind and tightening its grip on my heart. A few days later, I decided to confide in someone. My brother, Matt, had always been my sounding board, the person I turned to when I needed perspective. We met for lunch at our usual spot, a small diner on the edge of town. "You look like hell," Matt said as I slid into the booth across from him. "What's going on?" I hesitated, glancing around the diner to make sure no one was listening. "It's probably nothing," I said, fiddling with the edge of my napkin. "But I've been feeling weird about Rachel and Aaron." Matt raised an eyebrow. "Weird how?" "I don't know. It's just. I've been noticing things. The way she looks at him, the way they laugh together. And there was this text on her phone the other day." I trailed off, feeling foolish as I said it out loud. "Maybe I'm just being paranoid." Matt leaned back in his seat, studying me. "You've known Aaron for, 20 years? And Rachel for almost as long. Don't you think you'd know if something was really going on?" "Yeah, I thought so," I said. "But now, I'm not so sure. There's this connection between them that I can't unsee. It's like it's always been there, and I just never noticed before." "Have you talked to Rachel about it?" "No. What would I even say? Hey, honey, are you secretly in love with my best friend?" I shook my head. I don't want to accuse her of something without proof. But I can't stop thinking about it. Matt nodded slowly. "Listen, man. You've always been the type to overthink things. Maybe this is just one of those times. But if it's really eating at you, maybe you should trust your gut and figure out what's going on." "How?" I asked. He shrugged. "I don't know. Pay attention. See if anything else feels off. But don't let it drive you crazy. Either way, you'll have to talk to her eventually. I left lunch feeling both reassured and more unsettled than before. Matt was right, I couldn't let this consume me. But I also couldn't ignore it. Over the next week, I kept my eyes and ears open, noting every interaction between Rachel and Aaron. The doubts were no longer whispers in the back of my mind. They were becoming a steady drumbeat, impossible to ignore. The subtle discomfort that had started with old photographs grew into a persistent itch I couldn't ignore. Every interaction between Rachel and Aaron now felt charged, as though something lurked beneath the surface. I tried to dismiss it, to tell myself I was being paranoid, but the doubt refused to be silenced. I needed answers, and I decided to start by retracing the past. One evening, after Rachel had gone to bed, I pulled out the box of photos again. This time, I wasn't looking to reminisce, I was searching for patterns. I spread the albums out on the dining table and flipped through them methodically, scrutinizing every image that included Rachel and Aaron. There they were at our engagement party, standing close together while I mingled with other guests. There was another from a camping trip, where they shared a knowing smile over a campfire. And then a Christmas party 2 years ago, with Rachel leaning into Aaron as they both laughed at something off camera. I told myself there was nothing incriminating in these pictures. They were just moments frozen in time. But when I looked at Rachel's face in those shots, her joy seemed different. Freer, more vibrant. It gnawed at me. The next day, I decided to dig deeper into Rachel's recent behavior. It wasn't something I was proud of, but the doubt had wormed its way into my mind, and I couldn't shake it. I started small, glancing at her phone when she left it unattended on the counter. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just some reassurance that everything was fine. Instead, I found more questions. A string of messages between her and Aaron stood out. Most were casual, a joke here, a question about a mutual friend there. But then I saw one from last week, thanks for listening. I don't know what I'd do without you. I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. It wasn't exactly damning, but it felt too intimate, too personal. I put the phone down as Rachel's footsteps approached and pretended to be engrossed in the mail. The unease continued to grow, and I decided to widen my search. That evening, when Rachel went out for a supposed girls' night, I rummaged through her desk drawers. It felt wrong, invasive, but I justified it to myself as necessary. In the back of the bottom drawer, I found an old journal I hadn't seen before. My heart pounded as I flipped through it. Most of the entries were innocuous, notes about work, lists of things to do. But then I came across an entry from a few months ago. Sometimes I feel like Jake doesn't really see me anymore. It's like I'm just part of the routine. Aaron, he listens. He really listens. And he makes me feel important. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. My chest tightened as I reread the words, trying to make sense of them. Rachel had always been open about her frustrations with me, work stress, the challenges of parenting, but she had never mentioned feeling unseen. And Aaron? Was I losing her to my best friend? I closed the journal and put it back exactly as I found it, my hands trembling. I spent the rest of the evening pacing the living room, the words looping in my mind, he makes me feel important. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed beside Rachel, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd missed this. How long had she been feeling this way? Was I so wrapped up in my own life that I hadn't noticed hers drifting away from me? And Aaron, what kind of friend would exploit that? But then a nagging thought crept in, what if I was wrong? What if I was blowing this out of proportion? I didn't have any concrete evidence of an affair, just fragments of suspicion and a growing sense of dread. By the time the first light of dawn seeped through the curtains, I had made up my mind. I needed to know the truth. The following day, I took a bold step. I called in sick to work and drove to a nearby electronics store. There, I bought a discreet recording device. It felt like a line I'd never thought I'd cross, but the need for clarity outweighed the guilt. That evening, I slipped the device into Rachel's purse while she was in the shower. If there was something to uncover, this would give me answers. For the next few days, I lived in a state of heightened anxiety. Every time Rachel left the house, I waited impatiently for her to return, eager to retrieve the recorder and see what it had captured. When I finally had the chance to review it, I sat alone in my car, heart hammering as I pressed play. Most of the recordings were mundane, phone calls with friends, errands, and snippets of music playing in the background. But then I heard Aaron's voice. "You're too good for him, Rachel," he said, his tone warm and comforting. "Don't say that," Rachel replied softly. "He's a good man. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like we're miles apart." I paused the recording, my hands trembling. The words were a dagger to my heart. Rachel had confided in Aaron, shared her doubts about our marriage with him. And he hadn't pushed her away. If anything, he'd encouraged it. My suspicions were no longer just paranoia. Something was happening between them, and I had to confront it. But how? I wasn't sure. All I knew was that the life I'd built with Rachel was starting to feel like a house of cards, ready to collapse at any moment. The weight of my suspicions felt unbearable, like a secret too big to contain. I'd always been a man who believed in transparency, in the strength of communication, but here I was, creeping around, planting recorders, and piecing together fragments of truth. It wasn't the man I wanted to be. Yet, I couldn't stop. It was a week after I'd planted the recording device that I had my next moment of clarity, if you could call it that. Rachel had invited a few friends over for drinks, Aaron included. I'd been tempted to excuse myself from the gathering entirely, but something held me back. I needed to see them together again, to figure out if I was imagining things or if there was really something between them. The evening began innocently enough. Rachel floated between the living room and kitchen, refilling drinks and laughing with our friends. Aaron was his usual charming self, cracking jokes and telling stories that had everyone in stitches. I hovered on the edges, trying to act casual but feeling like an intruder in my own home. At one point, I excused myself to the bathroom, but instead of heading there, I detoured down the hallway. The house was filled with the hum of conversation, but I could still make out individual voices if I focused. And then, as I passed by the partially open door to the den, I heard it, Rachel and Aaron talking in hushed tones. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this," Rachel said. Her voice was low but tinged with a sadness that made my chest tighten. "You're stronger than you think," Aaron replied. "Besides, you deserve to be happy. You both do." I froze, my heart pounding. They couldn't possibly be talking about what I thought they were, could they? "It's just complicated," Rachel said, her voice cracking slightly. "I never wanted it to be like this." Aaron sighed. "Sometimes you just have to trust that things will work out the way they're supposed to. You're not alone in this, Rachel. You know that, right?" I couldn't listen anymore. The words felt like a slap, confirming every fear I'd been harboring. I backed away from the door and retreated to the bathroom, locking the door behind me as I tried to catch my breath. My hands shook as I gripped the edge of the sink, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Who was I becoming? A man ruled by suspicion and jealousy, snooping on his wife's private conversations. And yet, how could I ignore what I'd just heard? The rest of the evening passed in a haze. I forced myself to smile and make small talk, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying the conversation I'd overheard. When the guests finally left, I watched Aaron and Rachel exchange a warm goodbye. Her hand lingered on his arm for just a moment too long, and my stomach churned. After the door closed, Rachel turned to me, her face glowing from the wine and laughter. "That was fun, wasn't it?" Yeah, I said, my voice sounding hollow even to my own ears. She didn't seem to notice. Instead, she leaned in and kissed me softly on the lips. I'm going to bed. Don't stay up too late. I nodded, watching her disappear down the hallway. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand an explanation for what I'd heard. But I didn't. I didn't know how to put my feelings into words, and I was terrified of what her response might be. The next morning, I woke early and decided to call Matt. If anyone could help me make sense of this mess, it was him. We met at the diner again, and as soon as I sat down, the words started spilling out of me. I overheard them talking last night, I said, my voice shaking. Rachel and Aaron. It sounded like they were talking about us. About her and me. And I think something might be going on between them. Matt frowned, leaning forward. What exactly did they say? I recounted the conversation as best as I could, my stomach twisting with every word. When I finished, Matt sat back in his seat, his expression unreadable. It doesn't sound good, he admitted. But it also doesn't confirm anything. They could have been talking about something else entirely. Maybe Rachel's just going through a tough time, and Aaron's trying to be a good friend. Or maybe he's trying to be more than that, I said bitterly. I don't know, Matt. I feel like I'm losing my grip here. He sighed. I think you need to talk to Rachel. Directly. This sneaking around isn't helping anyone, least of all you. Just ask her what's going on. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe it's something you two can work through. But you won't know until you talk to her. I nodded, knowing he was right. But the thought of confronting Rachel filled me with dread. What if she confirmed my worst fears? What if I was right about her and Aaron? And worse, what if I wasn't? As I drove home, Matt's words echoed in my mind. You need to talk to her, it was the only way forward. But I wasn't sure I was ready for the answers I might find. Matt's advice lingered in my mind like an unspoken challenge. Confronting Rachel directly felt monumental, like standing at the edge of a cliff and staring into the abyss. I wasn't ready to leap just yet. Instead, I decided to take a different approach, gather more information. If I was going to confront her, I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. That evening, Rachel left for another girls' night. The timing couldn't have been better. As soon as she was out the door, I began searching the house. I knew it was wrong, invasive, but I justified it to myself as a necessary evil. If there was something to find, I needed to find it. I started with her phone. She'd taken it with her, of course, but I remembered she often backed up her photos and messages to her laptop. Her laptop was password protected, but I'd seen her type the password enough times to guess it. My fingers hovered over the keys for a moment, hesitating, before I typed it in. The desktop sprang to life. I clicked on the Messages app first. Most of her conversations were harmless, chatting with friends, family, and coworkers. But then I found the thread with Aaron. It wasn't labeled with his name, instead, it was under a generic contact labeled A. The messages were ambiguous. They weren't outright romantic, but there was a warmth to them that felt out of place. Aaron complimented her often, told her she was amazing and strong, and there were several messages referencing secret chats they'd had. One message from Rachel stood out, thanks for always being there. You have no idea how much it means to me. I took screenshots of the conversation, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach with each click. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was enough to keep the doubt alive. Next, I searched her emails. Most of them were work-related, but then I stumbled upon an exchange between Rachel and Aaron from a few months ago. The subject line read, weekend plans. Aaron, looking forward to it. Don't worry, we'll figure it out. Rachel, I hope so. I hate sneaking around, but it's the only way right now. My breath caught in my throat. What plans were they sneaking around for? Was it innocent, or was it exactly what I feared? Feeling emboldened, I turned to the next logical step, her desk. Rachel had always kept a small stash of personal items in the second drawer, things like notebooks, pens, and receipts. Among the clutter, I found a folded piece of paper tucked beneath a pile of receipts. It was a note, handwritten by Aaron. Asterisk Rachel. You're stronger than you realize. I'm here for you, always. Remember that. Asterisk. The handwriting was unmistakable. I stared at the note, a swirl of emotions churning in my chest. It was kind, supportive even, but it felt too intimate. Why was he writing her notes like this? And why was she keeping them? I'd gone too far to stop now. I searched through more drawers, flipping through notebooks and rifling through papers, but most of it was ordinary, grocery lists, old bills, and work documents. Just as I was about to give up, I found something else, a receipt for a weekend getaway. The dates matched a time when Rachel had claimed to be visiting her sister. But the hotel wasn't anywhere near her sister's place. The receipt had Aaron's name on it, too. When Rachel came home that night, I was sitting on the couch, the screenshots, note, and receipt spread out on the coffee table in front of me. My heart pounded as I waited for her to walk through the door. She greeted me cheerfully, a little flushed from wine, but her smile faltered when she saw my expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting her purse down. I gestured to the table. "Care to explain this?" Her eyes widened as she looked at the items laid out before her. For a moment, she said nothing, her face a mask of shock. Then, slowly, she sank onto the couch across from me. "Jake," she began, her voice trembling. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. "Aaron and we've been talking a lot lately. I've been going through some things, and he's been a good friend. That's all." "A good friend?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Good friends don't sneak around and book hotel rooms together." Her head snapped up, her eyes flashing with something between anger and desperation. "It's not like that," she said. I can explain. Just let me." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "You need to be honest with me, Rachel. Right now. No more half-truths, no more secrets. What's going on between you and Aaron?" She looked at me, tears welling in her eyes, and for the first time, I saw something crack in her expression. Whether it was guilt, shame, or something else entirely, I couldn't tell. But I knew one thing for certain, this conversation was far from over. The confrontation with Rachel left me feeling more unsettled than ever. She hadn't admitted to an affair, but her explanations were riddled with hesitations and half-answers that only deepened my suspicions. I needed more clarity, and there was only one person who could provide it. Aaron. I called him the next morning, my stomach in knots as I waited for him to pick up. When his voice came through the line, cheerful and unsuspecting, I felt a pang of guilt for what I was about to do. "Hey, Aaron," I said, forcing a casual tone. "Got time for a drink? There's something I've been wanting to talk about." "Sure," he replied without hesitation. "Everything okay?" Yeah, I lied. "Just figured it's been a while since we caught up." We agreed to meet that evening at a quiet bar downtown. As I drove there, my mind raced with questions and doubts. How could I bring this up without accusing him outright? What if I was wrong? Worse, what if I was right? When I arrived, Aaron was already there, sitting at a corner booth with a beer in hand. He greeted me with his usual easy smile, but as I sat down across from him, I couldn't muster one in return. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, half joking. "What's going on, Jake?" I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening around the glass of water the waiter had just set in front of me. I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me. Aaron's smile faded, replaced by a look of concern. Of course. What's this about? Rachel, I said, the word feeling heavy in my mouth. And you? His brows furrowed. What about Rachel and me? I've noticed some things lately, I said carefully. The way you two interact, the messages, the hotel receipt. Aaron, is there something going on between you and my wife? For a moment, Aaron just stared at me, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. Then he shook his head vehemently. No. Jake, no. There's nothing going on. Then why does it feel like there is? I pressed. Why are there messages about sneaking around? Why are you writing her notes about being strong and always being there for her? Aaron sighed, running a hand through his hair. Because she's been struggling, Jake. She's been feeling disconnected, I guess. From you, from herself. I've been trying to help her work through it. That's all. Disconnected? I repeated, my chest tightening. From me? Yeah, Aaron said, his voice soft. She didn't want to burden you with it, so she leaned on me. But I swear to you, Jake, it's never gone beyond that. I'd never do that to you. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him. But his words didn't erase the doubts that had been gnawing at me for weeks. Why didn't she tell me? I asked, my voice breaking. Why wouldn't she come to me? Aaron hesitated. She said she didn't think you'd understand. That you've been so focused on work and everything else that she didn't want to add to your stress. I stared down at the table, my mind spinning. Had I been so wrapped up in my own world that I'd missed what was happening in hers? Or was this just a convenient excuse? Jake, Aaron said, leaning forward. I get why you're upset. But I promise you, there's nothing romantic or inappropriate going on. Rachel loves you. She's just going through something, and I've been trying to be a friend. That's all. I left the bar feeling more confused than ever. Aaron had been adamant that nothing was happening, but his explanations didn't sit right with me. If Rachel was struggling, why hadn't she said anything? And why was she keeping it a secret from me while confiding in Aaron? When I got home, Rachel was already in bed. I stood in the doorway, watching her sleep, my heart aching with a mix of love and doubt. She looked so peaceful, so innocent, but my mind couldn't stop racing. Was Aaron telling the truth? Or was he just covering for her? I climbed into bed, careful not to wake her, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd talk to Rachel again. I'd push for answers, for the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I couldn't keep living like this. One way or another, I needed to know. The next morning, I woke with a resolve that had eluded me for weeks. No more snooping, no more second-guessing. It was time to confront Rachel directly and demand the truth. She was in the kitchen when I came downstairs, humming softly as she poured herself a cup of coffee. She looked so normal, so utterly at ease, that I almost doubted myself. But the weight in my chest reminded me why I couldn't let this go. Rachel, I said, my voice more serious than I'd intended. She looked up, her smile faltering. Good morning. You okay? I hesitated for a moment, then gestured toward the dining table. We need to talk. Her brows furrowed, but she nodded and sat down, cradling her mug in her hands. I took the seat across from her, my heart pounding. What's going on? She asked, her tone cautious. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I need you to be honest with me, Rachel. About you and Aaron. Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I saw something flash across her face, guilt. Fear. She quickly masked it with confusion. What are you talking about? I've noticed things, I said, my voice tightening. The messages, the hotel receipt, the way you two act around each other. I overheard you talking the other night. I need to know what's going on. Her mouth opened, then closed, as if she couldn't decide where to begin. Finally, she set her mug down and folded her hands in her lap. Jake, I swear, it's not what you think. Then what is it? I demanded. Because right now, it looks like you're having an affair with my best friend. I'm not, she said quickly, her voice trembling. I've never cheated on you, Jake. Never. Then why the secrecy? I asked. Why the lies? She hesitated again, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. Finally, she sighed and leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. Because I didn't want to hurt you. Hurt me? I repeated, incredulous. You think sneaking around with Aaron wouldn't hurt me? It's not like that, she insisted. I've been struggling, Jake. With us, with everything. And Aaron, he's been there for me. He's been someone I can talk to. Why not talk to me? I asked, my voice breaking. I'm your husband, Rachel. Why didn't you come to me? She looked down, tears welling in her eyes. Because I didn't think you'd understand. You've been so busy with work, so distracted. I didn't want to add to your stress. I felt like the ground was shifting beneath me. Had I really been that distant? That oblivious? So you turned to Aaron, I said bitterly. You confided in him instead of me. It wasn't like I planned it, she said, her voice cracking. It just happened. He was there when I needed someone, and he listened. That's all it was, Jake. I swear. I studied her face, searching for any sign of deceit. She looked sincere, but the doubt in my heart wouldn't let me fully believe her. And the hotel receipt? I pressed. Explain that. Her face paled, and she shook her head. That wasn't, she hesitated, then sighed. Aaron and I went there to talk. I was feeling overwhelmed, and I needed space. Nothing happened, Jake. I swear on everything I love. I wanted to believe her. Desperately. But the image of them alone in a hotel room was seared into my mind, and I couldn't shake it. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why keep it a secret if it was innocent? Because I knew how it would look, she admitted. And I was afraid of exactly this. Of you thinking the worst. We sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of her words hanging in the air. I wanted to scream, to cry, to make sense of everything. But all I could do was stare at her, my heart torn between love and betrayal. I don't know if I can believe you, I finally said, my voice raw. Not after everything I've seen. Her eyes filled with tears, and she reached across the table to take my hand. Jake, please. I love you. I'm sorry for how I handled things, but you have to believe me. I would never betray you like that. I pulled my hand away, the pain too fresh. I need time, I said. I need to think. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Take all the time you need. Just, please don't give up on us. I didn't respond. Instead, I stood and left the room, leaving her sitting alone at the table. My mind was a storm of emotions, and I knew that whatever came next, nothing would ever be the same again. The days following my confrontation with Rachel were a blur of uncertainty and heartache. I tried to focus on work, to distract myself, but every quiet moment brought her words rushing back. I love you. I would never betray you. She'd sounded sincere, but the doubt in my heart was unshakable. On the third day, something unexpected happened. I received a text message from an unknown number. The message read. Asterisk, if you want the truth, look closer. It's not just Aaron. Someone else is involved. Asterisk. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. Who had sent it? And what did they mean, someone else? I typed out a reply, my fingers trembling. Asterisk, who is this? What are you talking about? Asterisk. The response came almost immediately. Asterisk, you've been blind, Jake. Look at Liz. Asterisk. Liz? The name hit me like a bolt of lightning. Liz was a close family friend and had been part of our circle for years. She was someone I'd never once suspected. But why would she be involved? And involved in what, exactly? Before I could reply, another message came through. Asterisk, check her phone records. Check Rachel's too. You'll see. Asterisk. I tried calling the number, but it went straight to voicemail. The voicemail box was full. Frustrated and on edge, I sat back in my chair, staring at my phone. Who would send this? And could I trust them? That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the message. Rachel was out running errands, and I was alone with my thoughts. Finally, I decided to follow the tip. I logged into our phone account, Rachel and I shared one, and began scrolling through the call logs. There was nothing unusual at first, just the usual calls to friends, family, and coworkers. But then I noticed something, a string of calls between Rachel and Liz. They weren't frequent enough to stand out on their own, but the timing was odd. Late-night calls, some lasting over an hour. Curiosity turned to dread as I cross-referenced the dates of the calls with other events. One of the calls had happened the same night Rachel claimed to be at a work event. Another coincided with the weekend she and Aaron had supposedly gone to the hotel to talk. What could she and Liz have to talk about for so long? And why had Rachel never mentioned it? The next day, I decided to confront Liz. If she was involved in whatever was happening, I needed to know. I called her and invited her to lunch, making sure my tone was casual. She agreed without hesitation, and we met at a small cafe near her office. Liz greeted me warmly, her smile as bright as ever. Hey, Jake. This is a nice surprise. How've you been? I've been better, I admitted, keeping my voice steady. There's something I wanted to talk to you about. Her smile faltered slightly. What's going on? I took a deep breath, deciding to cut straight to the point. Liz, have you been talking to Rachel a lot lately? Late at night, I mean. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely surprised. Yeah. We've talked a bit. Why? What about? I pressed. I've noticed the timing of those calls, and it's strange, to say the least. Liz hesitated, then set her coffee cup down. Jake, I think you should talk to Rachel about this. I've already talked to Rachel, I said, my frustration bubbling to the surface. She says nothing is going on, but the more I dig, the more I realize there are things she's not telling me. So I'm asking you. What's going on? Liz's expression softened, and she reached across the table to place a hand on mine. Jake, I'm not sure it's my place to say. Rachel's been struggling. She's confided in me about a lot of things, but I think it's better if you hear it from her. Struggling with what? I asked, my voice rising slightly. Why can't anyone just tell me the truth? Liz sighed, pulling her hand back. Because the truth is complicated. And sometimes, it's not as simple as you think. Just, talk to Rachel again, Jake. Really talk to her. I left the cafe feeling more frustrated than ever. Liz's words had only added to the mystery, and I was no closer to understanding what was really happening. But one thing was clear, the anonymous tipster had been right about one thing. Liz knew more than she was letting on. That evening, I confronted Rachel again. This time, I didn't hold back. I know you've been talking to Liz, I said as soon as she walked through the door. Late at night, during times when you were supposedly somewhere else. What's going on, Rachel? Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw a panic flash across her face. Then she sighed, her shoulders slumping. "I was going to tell you," she said quietly. "I just didn't know how." "Tell me what?" I demanded. She hesitated, then looked me straight in the eye. "Liz isn't who you think she is." Her words sent a chill down my spine. "What does that mean?" Rachel took a deep breath, as if preparing herself to say something she'd been holding back for a long time. "It means there's more to this story than you realize. And it's time you knew everything." Rachel's words hung in the air like a storm cloud. "Liz isn't who you think she is." The room felt smaller, heavier, as though the walls were closing in around us. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rachel hesitated, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. Finally, she sighed and sat down at the edge of the couch, motioning for me to join her. I remained standing, too tense to sit. "Liz and I have known each other for a long time," she began. "Longer than you know. We went to college together. She was there for me during some difficult times. Why didn't you ever mention that?" I asked, my suspicion deepening. "Because it didn't seem relevant," she said, looking down at her hands. "When you introduced me to Aaron and your other friends, and I realized Liz was part of your circle, I thought it was a coincidence. But then," she trailed off, her expression darkening. "But then what?" I pressed, my patience wearing thin. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with a mixture of guilt and fear. "But then I realized Liz had orchestrated it. She'd gotten close to you on purpose. She wanted to be part of your life." My mind reeled. "What are you saying? That Liz is some kind of stalker?" Rachel shook her head. "No, not exactly. But she's manipulative, Jake. She has this way of getting into people's lives, making herself indispensable. And," she hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper, "she's always had feelings for me." I stared at her, stunned. "Feelings? Like, romantic feelings?" Rachel nodded, her face flushed with shame. "She told me back in college, but I didn't feel the same way. I thought she'd moved on, but now I'm not so sure. She's been stirring things up, trying to create distance between us." "And Aaron?" I asked, my voice laced with anger. "Where does he fit into this?" "She's been using him," Rachel said, her tone pleading. "I don't think Aaron even realizes it. Liz is good at making people do what she wants without them knowing. She encouraged me to lean on Aaron, told me it was okay to confide in him when I felt like you weren't listening. But now I see it was all part of her plan." I struggled to process her words. Could Liz really have manipulated us all? It seemed far-fetched, but the pieces were starting to fit together. The late-night calls, the anonymous tip, the way Liz had avoided giving me straight answers at lunch. "Why didn't you tell me this sooner?" I asked, my voice rising. "Why let it get this far?" Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "Because I didn't want to believe it. I thought I could handle it, that I could keep her at a distance. But then things started spiraling, and I didn't know how to fix it without telling you everything." "And now?" I asked, crossing my arms. "What are we supposed to do now?" "We need to talk to her," Rachel said, her voice trembling. "Together. We need to confront her and get to the bottom of this." The idea of confronting Liz filled me with equal parts dread and determination. If Rachel was right, then Liz had been playing us for years. But if Rachel was wrong, well, I didn't want to think about that possibility. We arranged to meet Liz at her apartment the following evening. Rachel insisted on being there, and though I had my reservations, I agreed. Whatever this was, we needed to face it together. When Liz opened the door, her face lit up with surprise. "Jake, Rachel. What's this about?" "We need to talk," I said, my tone firm. "Can we come in?" Liz hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let us in. Her apartment was impeccably tidy, every surface gleaming and perfectly arranged. It was a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in my mind. We sat down in the living room, the tension in the air palpable. Liz looked from me to Rachel, her expression cautious. So, what's going on? Rachel glanced at me, then back at Liz. We know, Liz. About everything. Liz's eyes narrowed slightly. Everything. The calls, the manipulation, the way you've been interfering in our lives, Rachel said, her voice growing steadier. It stops now. For a moment, Liz didn't respond. Then, to my shock, she laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that sent a chill down my spine. You think you know everything, she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. You have no idea what you're talking about. Then enlighten us, I said, my anger rising. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been playing games with our lives. Liz's expression shifted, her smile fading. You want the truth, she said, leaning forward. Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you. Liz leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest. Her gaze darted between Rachel and me, her lips curling into a smirk. It was the look of someone who had been cornered but wasn't ready to surrender. You really want to know the truth, she said, her voice calm but edged with defiance. Yes, I said firmly. No more games, Liz. Just tell us. She exhaled slowly, as though weighing her options. Then, with a shrug, she began. You're right, Jake. I've known Rachel for a long time. And yes, I've always cared about her. More than she's ever cared about me, apparently. She shot Rachel a pointed look before continuing. But you've got it all wrong if you think I'm the one pulling the strings here. What does that mean? Rachel asked, her voice trembling. Liz's eyes softened, but only slightly. It means you've been blind to what's been happening around you. Both of you. Do you really think Aaron is innocent in all this? The mention of Aaron's name made my stomach tighten. What are you saying? I asked, my tone cautious. I'm saying that Aaron isn't the saint you think he is, Liz replied. He's been feeding Rachel's doubts about your marriage, Jake. Whispering in her ear, encouraging her to lean on him. And Rachel, she turned to my wife, her expression hardening, you let him. You let him get too close, and now you're paying the price. Rachel's face went pale. That's not true, she said, shaking her head. Aaron's been nothing but supportive. He's my friend. Your friend? Liz scoffed. Rachel, wake up. He's been waiting for his moment, playing the long game. And you've been giving him exactly what he wants. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. Why should we believe you? I asked. You've been keeping secrets too, Liz. How do we know you're not just trying to deflect? Liz's smirk returned, but it was tinged with sadness. Because I have nothing left to lose, she said quietly. Do you think I enjoy watching this mess unfold? Watching Rachel turn to Aaron while you spiral into paranoia. I tried to stop it, Jake. I tried to protect both of you. But neither of you wanted to see what was right in front of you. Her words hit me like a sledgehammer. Had I been so consumed by my suspicions that I'd missed the bigger picture? Was Aaron the real threat all along? The room fell silent, the weight of Liz's revelation settling over us like a heavy blanket. Rachel sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the war between loyalty and doubt. Why didn't you say something sooner? Rachel finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Liz's expression softened. Because you wouldn't have listened, she said. You were too caught up in your own problems to see what was happening. And honestly, I thought you'd figure it out on your own. So what now? I asked, my voice tight. What are we supposed to do with this? Liz leaned forward, her gaze locking onto mine. You need to talk to Aaron. Confront him. If you really want to know the truth, that's where you'll find it. I nodded slowly, her words sinking in. She was right. Aaron had been a constant presence in our lives, and it was time to face him head-on. But there was one thing I needed to know first. And you? I asked, my tone sharp. What role do you play in all this, Liz? Are you done interfering? Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded. I'm done, she said. I've said my piece. The rest is up to you. Rachel and I left Liz's apartment in silence, the tension between us thicker than ever. When we got home, she turned to me, her eyes filled with tears. Jake, I don't know what to believe anymore, she said, her voice breaking. But I need you to know that I've never stopped loving you. No matter what happens, that's the truth. I wanted to believe her. More than anything, I wanted to believe that we could fix this, that our marriage could survive the web of lies and betrayals we'd found ourselves tangled in. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, one thought consumed me. What would Aaron say when I confronted him? The next morning, I called Aaron. My hands were clammy as I gripped my phone, listening to it ring. When he answered, his voice was as cheerful as ever. Hey, Jake. What's up? Can we meet? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. I need to talk to you. It's important. There was a pause, then Aaron replied, of course. When and where? We agreed to meet at a park near my house, a quiet spot where we could talk without interruptions. As I walked to the park, my thoughts raced. What would I say? How would he respond? Was I ready for the truth? When I arrived, Aaron was already there, sitting on a bench under a large oak tree. He smiled when he saw me, but there was a flicker of something else in his expression, nervousness, perhaps. I couldn't tell. What's going on, Jake? He asked as I approached. I didn't sit down. Instead, I stood in front of him, my arms crossed. I've been noticing some things, Aaron, I began. About you and Rachel. His smile faltered. What do you mean? Don't play dumb, I said, my voice hardening. The messages, the time you've been spending together, the hotel. I've heard things, Aaron. And I need to know the truth. Are you in love with my wife? Aaron's eyes widened, and he stood up, holding his hands up in a gesture of surrender. Whoa, whoa. Jake, calm down. It's not what you think. Then what is it? I demanded. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been trying to come between us. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I'm not in love with Rachel. I'd never do that to you. She's been going through a tough time, and I've been there for her as a friend. That's all. A friend? I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Friends don't sneak around. Friends don't encourage doubts in a marriage. Liz told me everything, Aaron. His face paled. Liz? That's right, I said, stepping closer. She told me how you've been feeding Rachel's insecurities, how you've been waiting for your moment. So tell me the truth, Aaron. Have you been trying to take my wife from me? For a moment, Aaron said nothing. Then he shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Liz has always been good at spinning stories, he said. She's jealous, Jake. She's always been jealous of anyone close to Rachel. She's trying to turn us against each other. So you're saying she's lying? I asked, my voice rising. I'm saying she's not telling the whole truth, Aaron replied. Yes, I've been there for Rachel. Yes, I've encouraged her to talk about her feelings. But it's because I care about both of you. I want you to work things out, not fall apart. His words sounded sincere, but the doubt in my heart refused to fade. And the hotel? I asked. Explain that. Aaron sighed again, his shoulders slumping. That was a mistake, he admitted. Rachel needed space, and she asked me to go with her so she could talk without feeling judged. Nothing happened, Jake. I swear. I studied his face, searching for any sign of deceit. He looked earnest, but I'd been fooled before. You've crossed lines, Aaron, I said finally. Even if nothing happened, you've been too involved in my marriage. It ends now. He nodded slowly. I understand. I'll step back. But Jake, for what it's worth, I never meant to hurt you or Rachel. I just wanted to help. I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and walked away, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. Had Aaron been telling the truth? Or was he just better at lying than Liz? When I got home, Rachel was waiting for me. She looked at me expectantly, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. What did he say? She asked. He denies everything, I said, my voice heavy with exhaustion. Says Liz is the one stirring the pot. Rachel's face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands. I don't know what to believe anymore, she said, her voice muffled. But Jake, I need you to believe me. I never cheated. I never wanted to hurt you. I sat down beside her, the weight of everything pressing down on me. I want to believe you, I said quietly. But right now, I don't know what's real and what's not. She reached for my hand, her touch hesitant. Then let's figure it out together, she said. No more secrets. No more lies. Just us. I looked into her eyes, searching for the truth. And for the first time in weeks, I saw a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back. Despite Aaron's insistence that he'd done nothing wrong, the confrontation left a sour taste in my mouth. His explanations felt too polished, too rehearsed, as though he'd anticipated my questions and prepared answers in advance. And yet, I couldn't entirely dismiss what he'd said about Liz. If she was manipulating us, as he claimed, how much of what I believed was true? Rachel and I tried to move forward, but the tension between us was palpable. We tiptoed around each other, avoiding the deeper conversations that loomed like storm clouds. Every interaction felt charged, every glance heavy with unspoken questions. It was during one of these silent evenings that I decided to confront Liz again. Her evasiveness during our first conversation still gnawed at me, and I needed clarity. If Aaron had been lying, I'd find out. And if Liz was the puppet master Aaron accused her of being, I'd expose her once and for all. Liz agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown. When I arrived, she was already there, sipping a latte and scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I approached, her expression neutral but guarded. Jake, she said, setting her cup down. Didn't expect to hear from you so soon. What's on your mind? I sat across from her, folding my hands on the table. Aaron told me his side of the story, I said without preamble. He claims you're the one manipulating things. That you've been stirring the pot and driving a wedge between Rachel and me. Liz's eyes widened, and for a moment, she looked genuinely offended. Then she laughed, a short, bitter sound. Of course he said that. Typical Aaron, deflecting blame. Did he conveniently forget to mention how he's been trying to replace you in Rachel's life? He said he was just being a friend, I replied, my voice tight. A friend? Liz's tone dripped with sarcasm. Jake, open your eyes. Aaron has been playing the long game for years. He's always been good at making himself indispensable, at making people think they can't live without him. And Rachel, she fell for it. And what about you? I countered. Aaron says you've been manipulating her too. Encouraging her to lean on him, driving a wedge between us. Liz's expression hardened. I'll admit, I've made mistakes, she said. I've been protective of Rachel, maybe too protective. But everything I've done has been to help her, not hurt her. Can Erin say the same? Her words stirred something in me, a flicker of doubt, a glimmer of truth. Could they both be telling partial truths, each spinning the narrative to suit their agenda? Or was one of them lying outright? As I left the coffee shop, my mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Liz's words lingered, but so did Erin's. Each had cast suspicion on the other, leaving me stranded in a sea of uncertainty. I needed to take a step back, to reevaluate everything with fresh eyes. That night, I sat down with Rachel. She looked up from her book as I entered the living room, her expression cautious. "We need to talk," I said, sitting beside her. She set the book aside, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "About what?" "About Liz. And Erin. And everything," I said. "I've talked to both of them, and they're each pointing fingers at the other. I don't know who to believe anymore." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, and she reached for my hand. "Jake, I'm so sorry," she said. "I never meant for things to get this complicated. I don't even know how we got here." "Neither do I admitted. "But I need to know the truth, Rachel. About everything. No more secrets, no more half-truths. If we're going to move forward, we need to lay it all out on the table." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "You're right. I'll tell you everything." Over the next hour, Rachel opened up in a way she never had before. She talked about her struggles, her feelings of isolation, and how she'd turned to Erin for support. She admitted that Liz had encouraged her to lean on him, but she also acknowledged that she'd made her own choices. "I let things go too far," she said, her voice trembling. "But I swear to you, Jake, nothing happened. Not with Erin, not with anyone. I love you, and I want to fix this." Her honesty was like a balm on my wounded heart, but it wasn't enough to erase the damage that had been done. Trust, once broken, is not easily repaired. And while I wanted to believe her, a part of me still hesitated. "I want to fix this too," I said finally. "But it's going to take time. And it's going to take work. From both of us." She nodded, her eyes filled with hope. "Whatever it takes." As we sat together in the quiet of our living room, I felt a small flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks, hope. But I knew the journey ahead would be anything but easy. And the questions lingering in my mind, about Erin, about Liz, about everything, were far from answered. The days that followed Rachel's confession were filled with cautious conversations and tentative steps toward rebuilding trust. We both knew that our relationship had been strained to its breaking point, but for the first time in weeks, it felt like we were on the same team. One evening, as we sat in the living room, Rachel turned to me, her face filled with resolve. "Jake, I've been thinking," she said. "We need to get some clarity. For us. For everything." I nodded, curious where she was going with this. "What do you mean?" "I think we should go to couples counseling," she said. "We've been through so much, and I think we need help figuring out how to move forward. Together." Her suggestion caught me off guard. I'd never been one to talk about my feelings openly, especially not with a stranger, but I couldn't deny the logic in her words. If we were going to salvage our marriage, we needed to address the deeper issues that had brought us to this point. "Okay," I said after a moment. "Let's do it." Rachel's eyes filled with relief, and she reached for my hand. "Thank you, Jake. I know this hasn't been easy, but I want to fix us. More than anything." I squeezed her hand, a flicker of hope sparking in my chest. "Me too." That week, Rachel found a counselor, and we scheduled our first session. The idea of sitting in a room and baring my soul to a stranger felt daunting, but I pushed through the discomfort. If this was what it took to save our marriage, I was willing to try. The counselor, Dr. Harper, was a kind woman in her late 50s with a calm demeanor that put me at ease. She began by asking us to share what had brought us to her office. Rachel spoke first, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "We've been struggling," she said. "There's been a lot of miscommunication, a lot of hurt. And I've made mistakes. Big ones. But I love Jake, and I want to find a way back to the partnership we used to have." Dr. Harper nodded, her gaze shifting to me. "Jake? How do you feel about what Rachel just shared?" I hesitated, my thoughts tangled. Finally, I took a deep breath and spoke. I feel betrayed," I admitted. "Not because she cheated, because I don't think she did. But because she kept things from me. She turned to other people instead of me. And that hurt." Rachel reached for my hand, her touch tentative. "I'm sorry, Jake. I never meant to hurt you." Dr. Harper nodded again. "It sounds like there's a lot of pain on both sides," she said. "But the fact that you're both here, willing to work through it, is a good sign. Let's start by unpacking some of the issues that brought you here." Over the next few sessions, we delved into the dynamics of our relationship. Dr. Harper helped us identify patterns of miscommunication and unmet expectations that had contributed to the distance between us. She encouraged us to be honest with each other, even when it was uncomfortable, and to listen without judgment. One evening, after a particularly emotional session, Rachel and I sat in the car, neither of us speaking. The weight of everything we'd uncovered felt overwhelming, but there was also a sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were making progress. "Thank you for doing this with me," Rachel said, breaking the silence. "I know it's not easy." I glanced at her, my heart aching with a mix of love and pain. "I'm doing it because I believe in us," I said. "And because I want to trust you again." She nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "I'll do whatever it takes to earn that trust, Jake. I promise." But even as we worked to rebuild our connection, the questions about Liz and Aaron lingered in the background. Dr. Harper had encouraged us to set boundaries with both of them while we focused on our relationship, and we'd agreed to limit contact. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there were pieces of the puzzle I hadn't yet uncovered. One night, as Rachel slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Despite the progress we'd made, a nagging doubt remained. Liz's accusations, Aaron's denials, something about it all didn't add up. And I couldn't rest until I found the truth. With a deep breath, I reached for my phone and began scrolling through old messages, emails, anything that might offer a clue. If there was more to this story, I was determined to uncover it, for Rachel, for us, and for the peace of mind I so desperately needed. The quiet hum of the night surrounded me as I scrolled through Rachel's old messages. My eyes burned from staring at the screen, but I couldn't stop. Every conversation, every text felt like a potential piece of the puzzle I'd been trying to solve. And then I found it. It was an email thread buried deep in her inbox, dated nearly a year ago. The subject line read, "Need to talk." The sender was Liz. My heart pounded as I clicked it open. The first email was brief. "Rachel, I've been thinking about everything lately, and I need to get this off my chest. Can we meet? It's important." Rachel's reply came a few hours later. "Liz, I'm not sure this is a good idea. Things are already complicated enough. Maybe we should just leave the past in the past." Liz responded almost immediately. "We can't keep pretending this isn't happening. I know you felt it too. Please, just give me a chance to explain." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. What was Liz talking about? What had she and Rachel been hiding? I scrolled further down the thread, my pulse quickening with each message. The conversation grew more cryptic, filled with references to choices and what might have been. Rachel's replies were cautious, evasive, while Liz's were urgent, almost pleading. Then I found the message that made my blood run cold. It was from Liz, sent late at night. Asterisk, you know how I feel about you, Rachel. I've always felt that way. Aaron was just a distraction, a way to get close to you. But he's not what I want. You are. Asterisk. The words blurred as I reread them, my chest tightening. Liz had used Aaron. She'd manipulated him, and Rachel, to fulfill her own desires. And Rachel, had she known? Had she let it happen? The next morning, I confronted Rachel with the email. She was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping her coffee, when I placed my phone in front of her. What is this? I asked, my voice trembling with anger. Her eyes flicked to the screen, and I saw the color drain from her face. Jake. I can explain. Then start explaining, I said, my tone sharper than I'd intended. She took a deep breath, setting her mug down. Liz and I, we had a complicated history, she began. Back in college, she had feelings for me. I didn't feel the same way, but I cared about her as a friend. I thought we'd moved past it, but when she came back into our lives, it stirred up old feelings. For her, not for me. And you didn't think to tell me? I asked, my voice rising. You didn't think I deserved to know that one of our closest friends was trying to, what? Replace me? I didn't know how to handle it, she admitted, tears welling in her eyes. Liz was persistent. And when Aaron started getting involved, I thought maybe it would distract her, take the pressure off me. But it only made things worse. So you let her manipulate all of us? I demanded. You let her drive a wedge between us, between me and Aaron? Do you have any idea what you've done? I'm sorry, Rachel said, her voice breaking. I thought I could handle it on my own. I didn't want to drag you into it. I never meant for any of this to happen. I stared at her, my anger warring with the love I still felt for her. The truth was finally out, but it didn't bring the closure I'd hoped for. If anything, it only deepened the wound. That evening, I called Aaron. He deserved to know the truth, just as much as I had. When I told him about Liz's email, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. I can't believe this, he said finally. All this time, I thought I was helping Rachel. I thought Liz was just being a good friend. But she was using me. I'm sorry, I said, my anger tempered by the hurt in his voice. I should have seen it sooner. We both should have, he said. But what now? What do we do? I didn't have an answer. The web Liz had woven had left us all tangled, and it would take time to unravel. But one thing was clear, the lies and manipulations had to end. And we had to decide what came next. That night, as I lay in bed beside Rachel, I felt a strange sense of calm. The truth had come out, and though it wasn't the resolution I'd hoped for, it was a step forward. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. We'll get through this, Rachel whispered, her voice heavy with exhaustion. I hope so, I replied, staring at the ceiling. But even as I said the words, a small part of me wondered if we truly could. The following week was a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. The revelations about Liz and Aaron had shaken the foundations of our lives, leaving Rachel and me to rebuild from the rubble. But with the truth finally out in the open, there was an unexpected sense of relief. The lies were behind us. Now, it was time to figure out what came next. Rachel and I continued our counseling sessions with Dr. Harper. Each session felt like peeling back another layer of pain, exposing raw nerves that we'd ignored for too long. But it also gave us tools to communicate better, to address the cracks in our relationship that had allowed Liz's manipulations to take root. Rebuilding trust takes time, Dr. Harper said during one session. But the fact that you're both willing to put in the effort speaks volumes about your commitment to each other. Her words were encouraging, but trust was a fragile thing. Every time Rachel left the house or her phone buzzed, a part of me braced for more secrets. It was an exhausting way to live, but I forced myself to push through, to focus on the progress we were making rather than the doubts that lingered. One evening, Rachel and I sat down to discuss the future. The tension that had once dominated our conversations had softened, replaced by a cautious optimism. "I've been thinking about Liz," Rachel said, her voice tentative. "About what to do next?" I nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I think we need to cut ties with her," she said finally. "As much as it hurts, she's caused too much damage. For us, for Aaron, for everyone." Her words surprised me, but they also made sense. Liz had been a toxic presence in our lives, her actions driven by her own unresolved feelings. Keeping her around would only prolong the pain. "I agree," I said. "It's time to move on." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "Thank you. I know it's not easy." The next day, Rachel and I met with Liz in a public park. It was a neutral space, free from the emotional weight of our homes. Liz greeted us with her usual confidence, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. "Thanks for meeting me," she said, her tone guarded. "Liz, we need to talk," Rachel began, her voice steady. "About everything that's happened." Liz nodded, her expression unreadable. "I figured as much." Rachel took a deep breath. "You've been an important part of my life for a long time. But what you've done, the way you've manipulated things, it's not okay. And it's caused so much pain." Liz's confidence faltered, and for a moment, she looked vulnerable. "Rachel, I never meant to hurt you," she said quietly. I didn't know how to let go." "I understand," Rachel said. "But I can't keep you in my life anymore. We need to move on. All of us." Liz's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. I understand. I'm sorry for everything." As we walked away, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Cutting ties with Liz was painful, but it was also necessary. It was a step toward healing, toward leaving the past behind and focusing on the future. Aaron, too, had distanced himself. After our conversation, he'd reached out to apologize for his role in everything. He admitted to being blinded by Liz's influence, and while I appreciated his honesty, our friendship would never be the same. Some wounds cut too deep to fully heal. Months passed, and Rachel and I continued to rebuild. It wasn't easy, but we took it one day at a time. Counseling helped us navigate the difficult conversations, and slowly, the trust that had been shattered began to mend. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Rachel took my hand. "Thank you for not giving up on us," she said, her voice soft. I squeezed her hand, my heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you for fighting for us," I replied. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. We'd faced the storm and come out the other side, scarred but stronger. And while the scars would always be there, they were a reminder of what we'd overcome, together. Subscribe to our channel so that your significant other never dares to cheat on you. And don't miss the next story, it's even more shocking than this one.